Weigh the three charged leptons, the electron, the muon, the tau. Their masses span 5 orders of magnitude, spaced with no evident rhythm. Now do something arbitrary. Take the square root of each mass, add the 3 roots, square that sum, and divide it into the plane sum of the masses. No recipe like that should give anything in particular. It gives 2/3, not 2/3 to 1 part in 10 joule, 2/3 to 1 part in 100,000. Koide noticed it in 1981, and the standard model has no comment to make. 2 puzzles hide in that paragraph, and one mechanism has to answer both. One thing before we begin, Advaita Chakra Theory is a speculative exploratory framework, not established peer-reviewed physics. Much of what follows is honest conjecture that still needs validation. Watch it in that spirit as ideas to test, argue with, and refute. Hold both facts together, because separately each is unremarkable. The hierarchy is enormous and structureless, a factor of about 3,500 from electron to tau, worse across the full Fermion table. The coincidence is the opposite, tiny and structured, a ratio pinned to a simple fraction. One mechanism has to make masses both violently unequal and delicately arranged, and those demands pull in opposite directions. So the chapter moves twice, first the ladder that generates the spread, then the disk that fixes the ratio. And it tags each step honestly, because the payload is knowing which part is forced and which is put in by hand. First, what mass is here? Mass in this theory is not a primitive property a particle simply has. It is the lifted gap of a nearly massless mode. The substrate is a lattice of rotors locked into step, and such a lattice can sway in one direction for free. That sway is the photon, the one mode nobody has pinned. Every massive fermion is that object with its flat direction slightly pinned, and its mass is the pinning frequency over the effective speed of light squared. So the question changes shape. Why the masses differ becomes why the lifting frequencies differ. And 5 decades of frequency needs a machine making exponential spread from couplings of order 1. 4 suspects, each struck off in turn. Suspect 1, 2 generations. If flavor is a spinning disk, 2 teeth would be simpler. It cannot work. A 2-tooth disk has no physical CP phase at all, so there is no sense in which its rotation is oriented. It cannot tell matter from antimatter, and our world does. 4 teeth fails from the other side, carrying 3 independent phases where the substrate offers a single spin. Hold that, because it returns as the reason 3 is forced rather than chosen. Suspect 2 build the ratio out of a potential. A long line of models has tried. Write an energy function whose lowest state sets the 3 mass roots, and let the vacuum choose the ratio. Foot went through those constructions and found a ceiling. Every positive energy version caps at 1/2 or below. 2/3 is not merely hard that way. It is out of range. This theory escapes the ceiling, and not by a trick. Its mass is a frequency gap, and frequency splitting is unbounded. But be precise about what the escape buys. It buys access to the locus. It does not select the point on it. Suspect 3 is my own earlier draft. It claimed a dynamical Koide value, a factor of 1 plus k over 3, read off the disk as though the geometry handed it over. That form does not survive the dynamics. It was retracted, and the amplitude behind the ratio was demoted to an imposed input. What replaces it is weaker and truer. 2/3 is a well-posed selection problem, a definite locus, and the charged leptons sit on it. Accommodated, then reduced, but not derived from a family symmetry that picks that point out uniquely. Suspect 4, the mass ladder, read as 18 free knobs. It is one geometric ratio and a length. The ladder first. Take a line of rotors and let each link be weaker than the one before it by a fixed ratio, the same ratio every step. That is a clockwork, and it has a property you get for nothing. Its massless mode does not spread evenly along the chain. It piles up at one end, falling off geometrically as you walk away. Now put matter somewhere down the chain. Whatever sits at a given site reaches the light mode only through the thin tail surviving there, and read as a mass. That tail is an exponentially suppressed gap. The suppression is geometric in the site index. About 18 sites with a link ratio of order 1 spans the entire observed Fermion hierarchy, electron to top, with no small parameter anywhere. Now the tag, because this one is blue. The clockwork is Giudis and McCullough from 2017, and the same zero mode appears as an edge state on any graded chain. What this theory adds is that it is not bolted on an exponential zero mode is what a graded rotor chain has. And the 18 is counted backwards from the spread we observe, not predicted. The latter explains the spread and nothing else, not how many rungs become generations, and not the ratio among the three leptons. Which brings the second structure, and a question the previous chapter left open: why are there three of everything? Give flavor a spinning disk with n-identical teeth, so its mass structure is a cyclic matrix. Most phases you can write into such a matrix are not physical. You rotate them away by relabelling the fields, and nothing observable changes. Count the ones that survive every relabelling and you get one formula n-1 times n-2 over 2. Now demand exactly one spin whose sense of rotation cannot be rotated away, so the disk distinguishes matter from antimatter. Set that formula equal to 1, it has one solution, n equals 3. Evaluate it. 2 teeth 0 phases, 3 teeth exactly 1, 4 teeth 3, 5 6. 3 is the smallest disk whose rotation is oriented at all, and the only one carrying precisely one orientation. That counting is Kobayashi and Maskawa, 1973. Standard flavor physics read as a statement about teeth. Now, the boundary. Demanding exactly one physical CP phase is itself an input, the assertion that flavor carries a single-oriented spin, not zero and not several. What the counting delivers rigorously is that this demand and 3 generations are the same statement. It converts an assumption about CP into the observed count, and does not conjure it from nothing. 3 teeth it is. Build the mass matrix of that disk and let it spin. Threefold symmetry means turning the disk by a third of a revolution must leave the mass structure unchanged, so the matrix commutes with the cyclic permutation of the teeth, and the most general object built from the identity, and one hop each way is a circulant. 3 parameters. 1 sets the common mass all 3 teeth share, the democratic part. 1 sets how strongly neighboring teeth talk to each other. 1 is a phase carried by the spin, because forward and backward hops take conjugate phases when the disk is turning. How fast it turns and how much CP flavor violates are 1 quantity, not 2. A circulant comes with a trick. The cyclic permutation's eigenvalues are the 3 cube roots of 1, so the matrix is diagonalized by the discrete Fourier vectors for free. Out come 3 eigenvalues, the common mass times 1 plus an amplitude times the cosine of a third of a revolution plus the spin phase once per tooth. What comes out of the disk is not the masses. It is the square roots of the masses. The circulant sits in the square root variable, which is why the structure Koide found in a table of numbers is automatic here rather than mysterious. It is a 3-site ring with a hopping phase and a flux through the loop. Now form Koide's ratio. 2 identities do the work, 3 cosines spaced a third of a revolution apart sum to 0, and their squares sum to 3 halves. Whatever the spin phase is, those sums do not care. So the sum of the roots is 3 times the common mass, and the sum of the masses is the common mass squared, times 3 plus 3 halves of the amplitude squared. Divide one by the other, and the common mass cancels. The spin phase cancels. What is left is 1 plus half the squared amplitude, all over 3. One number in, one out, it equals 2/3 exactly when the amplitude is root 2. That is the whole of it, and here is the honest core. Nothing in the disk fixes the amplitude. Nothing at all. The circulant is happy with any value, and each one gives a different ratio. Root 2 was put in by hand, chosen because it lands on 2/3. Every earlier statement of this result in my own corpus reaches the answer that way, and I will not pretend otherwise. Without a reason for that number, what you have is not a prediction. It is Koide's coincidence relabeled in nicer notation. So this badge is red, and the next move is the only interesting one left, earning the number back. Root 2 is not an opaque number. It has an exact geometric meaning. Put the 3 mass roots into a vector, 1 component per lepton, then split that vector in 2. One piece runs along the democratic direction, where all 3 components are equal, the common mass they share. The other is everything left over, in the plane orthogonal to it, the part that makes the 3 leptons different from each other. Work out the 2 squared lengths. The democratic piece comes to 3 times the common mass squared. The splitting piece comes to 3 halves of the same thing times the squared amplitude. Now set them equal. Demand that the vector carry the same length along the democratic direction as in the splitting plane, and the algebra hands back a squared amplitude of 2, the Koide condition, exactly. Geometrically, the vector sits at 45 degrees to the democratic axis. That is Foot's reading from 1994, and it turns the coincidence into a statement about an angle. And those two directions are not arbitrary. They are the invariant subspaces of the disk's threefold symmetry, the one-dimensional piece treating all teeth alike, and the two-dimensional piece that splits them apart. Equal length in each accessible subspace has a name. It is equipartition, maximum entropy across the sectors a symmetry allows. And equipartition is not a new assumption. It is the one this book already spends a substrate with no reason to prefer one sector over another populates them equally. Grant that, and the amplitude is derived rather than imposed. This does not remove an assumption. It relocates one. The number is no longer an isolated insertion. It is the flavor sector face of the same typicality the book grants for heat in Planck's law and for quantum probability in the Born rule. Part 7 argues those are one frontier and not three. Two things: it still does not fix the overall mass scale and the spin phase. Equipartition fixes the shape, not the size, and not where on the cone the roots sit. Run the numbers, because one part in 100,000 deserves checking in public. The measured masses: the electron at 0.511 megaelectronvolts, the muon at 105.66, the tau at 1776.9. The roots 0.715, 10.28, 42.15. Add them 53.14. Square that 2024. The plain sum of the masses is 1,983. Divide 0.666661. 2/3 to about 1 part in 10 to the 5th. Fix the common mass by dividing the root sum by 3 to 17.72. Set the amplitude to √2 and solve for the one remaining parameter, the spin phase. It comes out near 0.22 radians, and that single angle places all three roots at once to 0.2%. One spin angle, three masses. But look at what was read off the data rather than predicted. Equipartition fixed the angle the vector makes with the democratic axis, and the phase fixed where on that cone the three roots sit. Neither fixed the length of the vector, and the length is the overall open mass. So what would break this? The first test is geometric and sharp. Under equipartition, 2/3 is not approximately right, it is exact. The three mass roots must lie on that 45-degree cone to whatever precision the masses are known, which makes the ratio a moving target required not to move. The tau mass carries the largest uncertainty of the three. Tighten it, and the measured ratio tightens with it. If it settles off 2/3 by more than the measurement error, the reduction is finished. Not weakened, finished. On today's numbers, it passes. The second test is the one I would bet the mechanism on. The disk does not know which sector it is in. Hand the same circulant to the neutrinos, and it predicts a Koide-type relation among their masses too, with its own spin phase set by that sector's rotation. So the neutrinos are a second, independent instance of the same machine. If their ratio, once measured, sits far from any circulant locus, then one disk per sector is wrong, and the mechanism goes with it. That is the cleanest falsifier this chapter has, and it is not decades away. Absolute mass cosmology with oscillation data is closing on the numbers needed to run it. The arithmetic is checked by machine as well as by hand. The routine builds the circulant, diagonalizes it over a scan across the amplitude and the phase, and confirms the eigenvalue form. Then it maps where the ratio equals 2/3 and finds a single line, the amplitude at √2 independent of the phase. It reproduces the charged lepton fit at 0.6669 with a phase near 0.222. And a companion routine builds the 18-side chain and checks that 1/1 link ratio really does reproduce the electron to top spread. Now what is not settled in decreasing order of hope? Residue 1 amplitude selection. Equipartition reduces √2 to the typicality axiom, but only given that the two subspaces actually equilibrate. Whether a family symmetry drives the disk there dynamically, rather than the substrate merely being typical there, is unknown. One object would close it a substrate-level proof that the coarse-grained flavor ensemble relaxes to equal weight in both subspaces for generic starting conditions. Nobody in this corpus has supplied it. Residue 2, the absolute scale. The overall electron mass is genuinely open, because equipartition sets ratios and not size. Residue 3, chain length. 18 sites is counted backwards from the data, not a derived integer. There is one consolation in residue 1, and it is structural. Part 7 argues this is not a Koide-specific mystery. The same relaxation assumption is what the book leans on for Planck's law and for the Born rule, one frontier wearing three costumes, so closing it here closes it for heat and for measurement at once. Attribution in full, because none of the machinery is mine. The clockwork is Giudice and McCullough. The phase count is Kobayashi and Maskawa. The circulant is the standard democratic mass matrix. The 45-degree reading is foot. The ratio itself is Koide. What this chapter adds is their common origin on one substrate and the reduction of one imposed number, not the theorems. The verdict in 3 parts. 1. The spread of the Fermion masses is a clockwork, the exponential zero mode of a graded rotor chain, standard physics relabeled onto the substrate, with a chain length still counted backwards from the data. 2-3 generations follow from demanding a single-oriented spin in the flavor sector. That is rigorous as an equivalence and an input as a demand, so the count is converted rather than conjured. 3. The Koide ratio is the mass root vector standing at 45 degrees to the democratic axis. That angle is equipartition between the 2 subspaces a 3-toothed disk has. It does not remove the assumption behind 2/3, it merges it with the one this book already owes for heat and for measurement. And the motif holds. 1 substrate, 1 locked gold stone. The charge on a fermion is a winding number on it, and the mass of that same fermion is how hard its flat direction was pinned 2 readings of 1 defect. The disk spinning in flavor is a subgroup of the same internal index that hands the theory its gauge group later, where the color count stays an input exactly as the amplitude stays 1 here. Where this goes next is part 7, where that typicality assumption gets a chapter of its own. Until then, 1 to try. Evaluate n-1 times n-2 over 2 for 2, 3, 4, and 5 teeth. Exactly 1 row reads 1. A word of acknowledgement. This work was inspired in part by the non-dual teachings of Sri Narayana Guru, that the creator, the creation, and the substance of creation are fundamentally one. Symbols from the Hindu tradition, the Sudarshan chakra and the Shiva linga, suggested the analogies behind the chakra model. They are acknowledged as philosophical and symbolic inspiration. The physics stands on its own. Thank you for watching. If this made you think, please like the video and subscribe. It genuinely helps this work reach the people who will argue with it properly. And do leave a comment, tell me where you think I am wrong. Every chapter in this series names its own kill tests, and the objections are the point. The book and the next chapter are linked below. Until then, one substance, and how far it reaches.